The twin sons of Xyrus hammered down on the dunes like molten hammers, turning the sand into a shimmering sea of gold and pain. Smoke coiled lazily from the wreckage of a downed skiff. Its hull split like a rotten fruit, spilling oil, gear, and blood onto the scorched earth. Amidst the chaos of the third siege of Vexera, where sandstorm and shrapnel danced a grim waltz, a lone human medic crouched behind a shattered sandstone outcrop, his breath ragged, his gloves slick with more than sweat. His name was Joran Vale, tall, lean, with eyes the color of storm clouds and hands that had stitched more wounds than he cared to count. He'd been attached to the Outer Rim Medcorps for 3 years, long enough to lose friends, long enough to learn the anatomy of a dozen alien species, but never long enough to grow numb. Not really. A guttural cry sliced through the whistle of wind and distant artillery. It came from the crater where the skiff had crashed. Too sharp, too regal, even in agony, to belong to any common soldier. Joran's instincts overruled caution. He slung his medkit over one shoulder, gripped his pulse pistol with the other, and sprinted, boots kicking up hot plumes behind him. He expected to find a wounded scout, maybe a lieutenant. What he found stole the breath from his lungs. She lay half-buried beneath twisted metal, one leg pinned, the other bleeding freely from a shrapnel tear just below the knee. Her skin was the deep violet of twilight clouds, smooth and gleaming with sweat and grit. Her hair, long, straight, and bone-white, fanned around her like spilled moonlight, tangled with sand and ash. Even half-conscious, her posture radiated authority. Even bleeding out in the sand, she looked like she commanded galaxies. The sigil on her pauldron, a stylized crescent cradling a star, marked her unmistakably, Empress Lyria of the Xyran Dominion. Joran froze. In this war, the Xyrans saw humans as little more than vermin crawling at the edge of their empire. And here he was, a human, staring at their Empress, wounded and vulnerable. Protocol screamed for him to leave. Survival whispered the same. But the medic in him, the part that saw only wounds, not wars, won out. He dropped to his knees, set his kit down, and began clearing debris from her leg with careful hands. Lyria stirred, her eyes snapping open, large, almond-shaped, and the color of liquid silver. She hissed through clenched teeth as another piece of hull shifted. "Who?" she began, voice rough but resonant, like wind through crystal chimes. "Medic," Joran said simply, not looking up. "Human. Don't move." Her gaze narrowed. "You dare." "I dare because you're bleeding." He cut in, finally meeting her eyes. "And because if you die here, this whole sandpit turns into a slaughterhouse. Your people will burn every human outpost from here to Proxima. So let me patch you up, Your Highness, before you sentence us all to death." She stared at him, silent for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, the corner of her mouth twitched. Bold, foolish, possibly both. She exhaled sharply. "Do it, then. But touch me with disrespect, and I'll have your hands grafted to your ears." Joran almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he nodded, opened his kit, and got to work. He cleaned the wound with antiseptic gel, his movements swift but gentle. She flinched only once, biting back a cry. He applied a bioseal bandage, then checked for internal bleeding with a handheld scanner. Her vital signs were stable, miraculously so, given the crash. Still, shock was setting in. He pulled a thermal blanket from his pack and draped it over her shoulders. "You're alone?" she asked after a while, watching him. "Was with a field unit. Got separated during the skimmer ambush." He didn't mention that his squad was probably dead. No need to add ghosts to her pain. "And you came for me, why?" "Because I'm a medic, not a soldier. Not today." She studied him, her gaze lingering on the insignia on his tunic. A white caduceus on a black field. "Your kind rarely show mercy to ours." "We rarely get the chance," he replied, tightening a pressure wrap. "Most of you shoot first, ask never." A dry chuckle escaped her. "Fair." Minutes passed in silence, save for the hiss of wind and the occasional crackle of burning metal. Joran stabilized her leg with a portable brace, then helped her shift into a more comfortable position against a slab of rock. She winced but didn't complain. When he offered her water from his canteen, she accepted it with a nod of thanks, small but real. "I remember you," she said suddenly. Joran raised an eyebrow. "Doubtful. I've never been within 100 clicks of the capital." "At the Battle of Orlan," she said, eyes distant. "6 months ago, you were treating wounded Zyrans behind your own lines. My scouts reported it. I thought it was a trick. Now I see it was just you." He shrugged. "The wounded don't carry flags in my eyes." She looked at him then, not as a human, not as an enemy, but as something else entirely. Something unfamiliar. Her fingers brushed the edge of the thermal blanket. "What is your name?" "Joran Vale." "Joran?" she repeated, testing the syllables like a new melody. "It sounds like rain." "Where I'm from, rain's rare," he said with a faint smile. "So maybe that's fitting." Thunder rumbled, not from the sky, but from the east. Distant engines. Reinforcements. Joran's stomach dropped. If it was human forces, they might kill her on sight. If it was Zyran, they might kill him. There was no good outcome. "Stay behind me," Lariah said, voice firm despite her weakness. "If it's my guard, I'll vouch for you. And if they don't believe you, then I'll kill them myself," she said without hesitation. Before he could respond, a trio of Zyran skimmers crested the dune, engines roaring. They circled once, then landed in a cloud of dust. Armored soldiers poured out, weapons raised, scanning the wreckage. When they saw their Empress, half-draped in a human's blanket, being tended by a human hand, they froze. "Lower your weapons," Lariah commanded, voice cracking like a whip. "This man saved my life. Harm him, and you answer to me." The soldiers exchanged glances but obeyed, lowering their rifles. Their commander, a tall, scarred officer with a plumed crest, rushed forward. "Your Radiance, we feared you lost." "Not yet," she said dryly. "Now get this wreckage off my leg and prepare a litter. And someone get this medic a proper escort back to base, human or Zyran, I don't care. He's under my protection." Joran started to protest. He didn't want to be anyone's pet project. But one look from Lariah silenced him. There was steel in her eyes, but also something softer, something that made his chest feel oddly tight. Over the next few days, Joran found himself not in a human outpost, but in the Royal Med Lodge on the outskirts of Vexor's palace complex, a fortress of sandstone and obsidian rising from the desert like a crown of thorns. He wasn't a prisoner, exactly. More, a guest with armed guards. Lariah insisted he stay until her leg healed enough to walk unaided. "It's only fair," she said when he questioned it. "You stitched me up. Now let me repay you with decent food and a bed that doesn't have scorpions in it." The lodge was quiet, cool, scented with desert herbs and something faintly floral, like night-blooming jasmine. Lariah visited him often, sometimes leaning on a cane, sometimes carried in a hoverchair by silent attendants. At first, their conversations were stiff, diplomatic, almost. She asked about Earth, he asked about Zyran customs. But slowly, the walls came down. She laughed at his jokes about military rations. He admired her dry wit and the way her eyes sparkled when she described the twin moons of Zyrus aligning over the glass dunes. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of crimson and violet, they sat on a balcony overlooking the desert. Lariah wore a simple robe, her white hair loose, her legs still wrapped. Joran leaned against the railing, nursing a cup of something that tasted like spiced cider. "You know," she said quietly, "in Zyran tradition, when someone saves your life, you're bound to them. Not by law, but by soul." Joran glanced at her. "Is that why you keep me here? Duty?" She turned to him, silver eyes searching his. "No, Joran. Not duty." He didn't ask what it was, but his pulse quickened anyway. The war didn't pause for healing hearts. Rumors reached the palace of a human-led raid on a Zyran supply depot, of Zyran retaliations scorching entire villages. Tensions climbed. Within the palace walls, factions whispered, some calling Lariah weak for harboring a human, others praising her mercy. One night, a dagger was found embedded in Joran's door. He didn't tell Lariah. She found out anyway. She stormed into his room before dawn, eyes blazing. "Who did this?" she demanded. "Doesn't matter," he said, pulling on his boots. "I've had worse. It matters to me." Her voice cracked, just slightly. And that's when he saw it, the fear beneath the fury. She was afraid of losing him. Not as a medic, not as a symbol, as Joran. He stepped closer, surprising them both. "I'm not going anywhere," he said softly. "Not unless you ask me to." She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out, her violet fingers brushing his wrist. Her touch was warm, electric. "I could never ask that." The moment stretched, fragile and bright. Then a siren split the air. Deep, urgent, unmistakable. Battle horns. Laria's expression hardened instantly. "The western gate," she said. "They're attacking the palace." Joran didn't hesitate. "I'm coming with you." "No." "Yes," he interrupted. "You need every hand. And I know how to keep people alive." She studied him, then nodded sharply. "Then stay close." The palace became a fortress within minutes. Soldiers scrambled to battlements. Archers manned the high walls. Energy cannons hummed to life. Joran was given a field kit and assigned to a triage station in the lower courtyard. Chaos erupted as the first wave hit, human mercenaries, hired by rebel Zyran lords, swarming the walls with plasma cutters and suicide drones. The sky turned orange with fire. Joran worked tirelessly, stitching, injecting, stabilizing. Blood stained his tunic, Zyran violet and human crimson. He lost count of the faces, the names. But through it all, he kept glancing toward the main gate, where Laria stood in full battle regalia, directing defenses with calm authority. Then a scream. A drone exploded near the eastern tower, collapsing part of the wall. Debris rained down, and through the dust, Joran saw her, Laria, thrown from her command perch, landing hard on the stone courtyard. He ran. She was unconscious, blood trickling from her temple. One arm twisted at a sickening angle. Joran dropped beside her, blocking out the battle, the screams, the world. He checked her pulse strong. Pupils reactive. Broken radius, possible concussion. He stabilized her neck, then lifted her into his arms. "Get her to the med lodge," he barked at two nearby guards. But as he turned, a shadow loomed. A mercenary, human, armored, rifle raised. Well, the Empress and her pet doc. Joran didn't think. He shoved Laria behind him just as the rifle fired. The bolt grazed his shoulder, searing through fabric and flesh. He grunted, stumbled, but didn't fall. In one fluid motion, he drew the combat knife from his belt and threw it. It struck true between the mercenary's ribs. The man gasped, collapsed. More footsteps, more enemies. Joran grabbed Laria and ran, ducking through corridors, bursting into the med lodge just as another explosion rocked the palace. He laid her on the main table, hands already moving to assess new injuries. She stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Joran, you're hurt." "Later," he said, pressing a bandage to his shoulder. "Right now, you're the priority." She caught his wrist again, weaker this time. "No, you are." He paused, looked down at her, and in that moment, something shifted between them, something neither could deny any longer. Hours later, the siege broke. The mercenaries, outmaneuvered and outgunned, retreated into the dunes. The palace stood, scarred but unbroken. Laria woke fully, her arm in a cast, her head bandaged, but her mind sharp as ever. Joran sat beside her, his shoulder wrapped, dark circles under his eyes. "They'll call you a traitor," she said softly. "Let them," he replied. "I've patched up enough of both sides to know the real enemy isn't human or Zyran. It's hate." She smiled faintly. "You're dangerous, Joran Vale. Not because you carry a knife or a rifle, but because you make people believe in better." He looked away, suddenly shy. "I just do my job." "No," she said, reaching for his hand. "You do much more than that." In the days that followed, the palace changed. Human medics were invited to train alongside Zyran healers. Prisoners from both sides were treated in the same wards. And Joran, once a stranger in a foreign land, found himself walking the halls not as a guest, but as something closer to family. Lariah recovered slowly, but with every step, she took Joran's arm, not out of need but choice. They walked the palace gardens at dusk, talked for hours about peace treaties and poetry, shared quiet meals under the twin moons. The court watched, some with suspicion, many with hope. One night, as they stood on the highest balcony, the same one where they'd first spoken of life debts, Lariah turned to him. The stars above were countless, cold and brilliant. "If I asked you to stay," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "would you?" Joran looked at her, her violet skin glowing in starlight, her white hair like spun silver, her eyes full of questions and courage. He thought of Earth, of his old life, of the war that had defined him for so long. Then he thought of her laugh, her stubbornness, the way she'd shielded him when the world wanted him dead. "Yes," he said, in a heartbeat. She didn't kiss him then, not yet, but she leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, her fingers laced with his. And the desert wind, once filled with screams, now carried only silence, and the quiet promise of something new. Weeks turned to months. The war didn't end overnight, but it began to bend. Lariah, with Joran at her side, brokered ceasefires, opened trade routes, established joint medical outposts across the frontier. He became her advisor, her confidant, her partner in every sense but name. And still, every night, she visited him in the medlodge turned home, bringing reports or tea or just her presence. And every night, he found himself more entangled in her orbit, not as a human among aliens, but as a man among equals. One evening, after a long council session, she arrived with a small velvet box. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside lay a ring, not gemstone, but woven from desert steel and human titanium, two metals forged into one unbroken circle. "In Zyran custom," she said, voice low and steady, "this is offered not in marriage but in unity. It means, I choose you, not because of duty, but because my soul recognizes yours." Joran stared at the ring, then at her. His throat tightened. "I don't have one for you," he said hoarsely. She smiled. "You already gave me yours. Every time you stayed. Every time you healed. Every time you looked at me like I was more than an empress." He took the ring, slipped it onto his finger. Fit perfectly. Then, finally, he kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative like the first rain after drought. Then deeper, surer, full of all the words they'd never said aloud. Around them, the palace slept. Beyond, the desert stretched endlessly, no longer a battlefield, but a bridge. They didn't speak of children that night, or of decades to come, or of the legacy they'd build. There would be time for that. For now, it was enough to stand together. Human and Zyran, Medic and Empress, two souls who'd found each other in the wreckage of war and dared to believe in peace. And in the quiet that followed, as the twin moons cast their silver light over the sands, Joran knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was exactly where he was meant to be. Peace, Joran learned, was not a destination but a fragile bridge built over a chasm of old wounds, and someone was determined to burn it down. 6 months after the siege, with joint human-Zyran medical outposts flourishing across the frontier and trade convoys moving safely for the first time in decades, the first sign of trouble arrived not with gunfire, but with silence. A relief caravan bound for the glass oasis failed to check in. Then another. Patrol drones returned with corrupted logs and scorch marks. Whispers stirred in the palace corridors, of shadow mercenaries, of a splinter faction calling itself the Purified Veil, sworn to cleanse the dominion of softness and human taint. Lariah dismissed them as extremists. Joran wasn't so sure. He'd been sleeping less, haunted by dreams of that desert battlefield. Not the crash, not the siege, but something deeper, older. Flashes of a human colony burning under Zyran skyfire. A child's hand reaching from rubble memories that weren't his. At first, he chalked it up to stress. Then came the headaches. Sharp, sudden, accompanied by bursts of static in his vision. He said nothing to Lariah. He didn't want to worry her. Not when she was finally smiling more than she scowled. But secrets have a way of surfacing. It happened during a routine inspection of the central med ward. Joran was reviewing vaccine shipments when a young Zyran intern, barely out of adolescence, brushed past him. The contact sent a jolt through Joran's skull, and suddenly, he wasn't in the med ward. He was kneeling in red dust, holding a dying woman who whispered, "Tell them the coordinates were wrong, they knew," before going still. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving Joran gasping, sweat soaking his tunic. Lariah found him slumped against a wall. "What's wrong?" she demanded, eyes sharp with concern. "Nothing," he lied. She didn't believe him, and that night, over spiced tea in her private chambers, she pressed, "Joran, you've been distant. You flinch at shadows. You don't sleep." He hesitated, then decided. Trust, after all, was the foundation of everything they'd built. "I've been having memories, not mine. Fragments, human colonies, Zyran raids, things I never saw." Her brow furrowed. "Are you certain?" Before he could answer, the palace alarms blared. A deep, pulsing wail reserved for internal breaches. Guards rushed past their door. Moments later, Commander Vrel, Lariah's most trusted general, burst in, armor smeared with soot. "Your Radiance, the Eastern Vault. It's been breached." Lariah stood. "What was taken?" "Nothing physical," Vrel said grimly. "But the neural archive. It was accessed by someone with high-level clearance." Joran's blood ran cold. The neural archive contained classified war records, genetic data, diplomatic logs, and something else. Something classified even to most of the Royal Council. The Zyran Memory Weave, a repository of ancestral and wartime recollections, used only in extreme circumstances. And Joran, he'd never been near it. Or had he? The next morning, under heavy guard, Joran submitted to a neural scan at the archive sanctum, a towering spire of black crystal deep beneath the palace. The archivist, an ancient Zyran with milky eyes and skin like dried parchment, placed a diadem on Joran's brow. Lights flickered. Data streams pulsed through the air like ghostly rivers. Then the archivist froze. "What is it?" Lariah asked, her voice tight. The old Zyran turned slowly. "This human, his neural signature matches a memory echo in the weave. From the Battle of Helios Reach. 17 years ago." Lariah stiffened. "Impossible. He wasn't born then." "He wasn't supposed to be," the archivist murmured. "But the weave doesn't lie. His mind carries a fragment of a Zyran soldier's final moments, implanted. Deliberately." Joran's stomach dropped. "Implanted? By whom?" The archivist exchanged a glance with Lariah, one heavy with dread. "There was a program," she said slowly, as if pulling the words from deep within. "During the early war years, Project Echo Bloom, we captured human children from border colonies, implanted them with Zyran memory fragments to create hybrid agents, deep cover operatives who could pass as human but think like Zyrans." Joran stared at her, disbelief turning to nausea. "You're saying I'm one of them?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "But someone made you remember." Before they could process this, a coded message arrived, burned onto a scrap of synth parchment, delivered by a dead courier found at the palace gates. The message bore the sigil of the purified veil. It read, "The false human walks among you. His blood is ours. His betrayal is coming." Panic spread. Courtiers whispered. Guards eyed Joran with suspicion. Even Vrel's hand hovered near his sidearm when Joran passed. Only Lariah stood firm. "If Joran were a spy," she declared in the grand chamber, voice ringing off obsidian walls, "he would have killed me a dozen times over. Instead, he saved my life more than once. I trust him with my throne and my heart." But trust alone couldn't stop what happened next. 3 nights later, Joran awoke to the scent of smoke and the sound of screams. He rushed to the balcony just in time to see the western wing of the palace erupt in fire. Not from outside, from within. Sabotage. He ran toward Lariah's chambers, heart pounding. He found her already armored, barking orders, but when she saw him, relief flickered in her eyes. Joran! Then her expression changed. Her gaze dropped to his hand. He followed it. On his wrist, the one that bore the unity ring, was a thin trail of ash, and beneath his fingernails, faint traces of the same chemical residue used in the vault breach. "No," he whispered. "I didn't do this," he said, voice raw. But even as he spoke, another vision seized him. Sharp, vivid, himself, standing in the vault, hands on the neural console, entering codes he shouldn't know, and a voice, cold, mechanical, whispering in his mind, "Awaken, Echo 7, complete your purpose." He staggered back, horror dawning. They built a trigger into me, a sleeper protocol. Laria's face paled. "Who?" Before he could answer, the doors burst open. Vrel stood there, flanked by royal guards. "Empress," he said, voice heavy. "Evidence places him at the sabotage sites. Neural residue matches his biometrics. The council demands his arrest." Joran didn't resist as they bound his hands. He looked only at Laria, searching her eyes for doubt. He found pain, fear, but not betrayal. "I'll find the truth," she said softly, "and I'll bring you home." They threw him into the obsidian vault, a prison cell carved from solid stone beneath the palace, reserved for traitors of the highest order. No windows, no light, only silence, and the whispers in his head. Days passed, or maybe hours. Time blurred. The voice returned, stronger now. "You were made to end her, to fracture the peace, to restore purity." But another voice answered, the memory of Laria's laugh, the warmth of her hand in his, the way she'd said his name like a prayer. He wasn't Echo 7. He was Joran Vale, and he would not be their weapon. Using a sliver of metal from his torn boot heel, he picked the lock of his restraints. Then, recalling schematics he'd studied while designing medevac routes, he located the ventilation shaft behind the eastern wall. It led to the old aqueducts, dry now but wide enough for a man to crawl through. He emerged into the desert night, miles from the palace, with nothing but the clothes on his back and the ring on his finger. He knew where he had to go, Helios Reach, the colony where Project Echo Bloom began. If answers existed, they were there. The journey took weeks. He hitched rides on smuggler skiffs, traded medical aid for passage, slept in ditches and derelict freighters. He arrived at Helios Reach to find it a ghost town. Buildings crumbled, streets overgrown with thorn vines, the sky perpetually stained with the haze of old fires. In the ruins of the old colony schoolhouse, he found what he was looking for. A hidden lab, buried beneath the foundation. Inside, rusted consoles flickered to life at his touch. Files scrolled across cracked screens, names, dates, experiment logs, and there, among them, Subject J7. Designation, Echo 7. Implantation successful. Memory weave integration, 92%. Emotional suppression, unstable. Recommendation, terminate. But someone had overridden the termination order. A final log entry, dated 17 years ago, signed by a Zyran scientist. "I cannot destroy him. He is a child." He laughs. He draws stars on the walls. "If this is sin, let the stars judge me." The scientist's name, Vela Ran. Joran's breath caught. He knew that name. Laria had mentioned her once. Her aunt, exiled for treason after opposing the war's escalation. Presumed dead. But she wasn't dead. And she'd saved him. Before he could process this, the lab door hissed open. Joran spun, fists raised, but it wasn't mercenaries. It was a woman, old but sharp-eyed, her violet skin faded with age, her white hair tied in a simple braid. She held a data chip in one hand and a pulse rifle in the other. "You took your time, Echo 7, she said, voice dry as desert wind. "I'm not," he began. "You are," she cut in. "But you're also more. I saw that the day I hid you among human refugees and wiped the last of the implant commands from your core memory. Or so I thought." Joran stared. "You're Vela Ran." She nodded. "And you, Joran Vale, are the only living proof that our two species can be more than enemies. Which is why they want you gone. Who? The purified veil. They're puppets, she said grimly. The real mastermind is Counselor Drex, an old war hawk who never accepted the truce. He's been using leftover echo protocols to reactivate dormant agents. You were the last, and the most dangerous because you fell in love with the Empress. Joran's mind raced. He triggered me to sabotage the palace, to turn Lariah against me. Exactly. And now he plans to assassinate her during the Unity Summit next week, the first joint gathering of human and Zyran leaders. If she dies, war reignites, and you'll be blamed. Joran's fists clenched. Not if I stop him first. Vela handed him the data chip. This contains Drex's entire network, names, coordinates, kill orders. But it's encrypted. Only a mind with both human and Zyran neural patterns can unlock it. Only you. He took the chip. What do I do? Go back, she said. Face the storm. Prove that love is stronger than programming. The Unity Summit was held in the Grand Hall of Vexera, beneath a dome of stained glass that cast rainbows across marble floors. Human ambassadors in simple tunics stood beside Zyran nobles in flowing silks. Cameras broadcast the historic moment across the galaxy. And at the center of it all stood Lariah, regal, resolute, heartbreakingly alone. Joran slipped in through the service tunnels, disguised as a maintenance worker. He'd sent a coded message to Vrel, vouching for his innocence, attaching fragments of Vela's data. The general hadn't replied, but when Joran passed a shadowed alcove, a hand yanked him inside. It was Vrel. You'd better be right about this, the general growled. I am. Above, Drex took the podium. Today we honor peace, he began, voice honeyed with false sincerity. But peace must be pure, untainted. Joran knew what was coming. He saw the flicker in Drex's eyes, the subtle shift of his hand toward his belt. A neural disruptor, designed to induce cardiac arrest from 20 paces. Now, Joran hissed. Vrel moved. So did half a dozen of his loyal guards, emerging from the crowd. But Drex was faster. He raised the device, aimed not at Lariah, but at Joran. Die, abomination, he snarled. The pulse fired. Joran braced. But Lariah, seeing the threat, threw herself in front of him. The beam struck her chest. She gasped, staggered, fell. No! Joran caught her before she hit the floor. Her eyes fluttered open, silver dimming. Joran, she whispered. He pressed his hands to her chest, scanning for damage. The disruptor hadn't killed her. It had triggered a neural cascade, shutting down her autonomic functions. Without immediate intervention, she'd be brain-dead in minutes. Think. Then he remembered the memory weave. It could restore neural pathways, but only if linked to a compatible mind. His mind, ignoring the chaos around him. Drex shouting, guards wrestling him down, Vrel barking orders. Joran lifted Lariah into his arms and ran for the archive sanctum. He burst through the doors, startling the archivist. Link us, he demanded. Now. The old Zyran hesitated. The weave has never been used this way. Do it. The archivist nodded, placing the diadem on Lariah's brow, then another on Joran's. Hold her hand, and pray your love is strong enough to bridge the void. Darkness swallowed them. Joran found himself in a vast, star-filled void, a mindscape where memory and emotion swirled like cosmic dust. Lariah floated ahead, fading, her form dissolving into light. Stay with me, he called. I'm tired, Joran, she whispered. So tired. You don't get to leave, he said fiercely. Not after everything. Not when we've only just begun. He reached into his own mind, pulling forth every memory he had of her. The first time she laughed at his joke, the way she'd shielded him from her guards, the kiss under the twin moons. He poured them into the void, a river of light against the encroaching dark. And then, from the depths of his own fractured past, he offered something else. Forgiveness. For the war. For the lies. For the pain they'd both inherited. Lariah's form solidified, Her eyes opened bright, alive. "You remembered me," she said. "I'll always remember you." Back in the sanctum, they both gasped awake, hands clasped, hearts pounding in sync. News of Drex's plot spread like wildfire. The Unity Summit didn't collapse, it hardened. Human and Zyran leaders stood side by side as he was tried, not as a counselor, but as a traitor to both species. And Joran? He was no longer called the human medic. He was Joran Vale, architect of unity, partner of the Empress, and, in time, consort of the Zyran Dominion. Their wedding was held not in the palace, but on the dunes where they'd first met, beneath the twin suns, with sand in their hair and hope in their hearts. Vela stood as witness, Vrel as honor guard, and as the desert wind carried their vows across the stars, Joran knew the war wasn't over, but the future was theirs to write, together.